So, one project I've been chipping away at on my X5 is the sound system. When I first got it, all the speakers were pretty much blown out. Things sounded terrible. I parted out a newer 4.8 IS, and like I swear to God, everything looked new on that car. The speakers were in mint condition, so I swapped out a bunch of those, the door speakers, the sub box, and then my amp actually got damaged. So I bought a newer used one off eBay, just a factory one. And what's interesting, I did need to do some coding to have it work with the non-navigation radio system and multi-information display. And I noticed when I put in the newer amp, I had a lot more bass, so that was cool. And I've been slowly replacing stuff with just OEM parts in good condition. But one problem I've always had is the dash speakers sounded muffled, kind of at higher volume. And those were original in my car. That's the one set of speakers that I didn't swap out. But it's been bothering me for a while. You know, I'd kind of try to show off the rest of the system to like friends riding my car. And then, you know, you turn up the volume a little bit too high and those dash speakers sound muffled. And as far as I understand, they're basically mids. They're not tweeters, but it seemed like vocals and those kind of like mid-range frequencies tend to get kind of muffled. So full disclosure, I'm not an audio person. I don't know that much about car audio, but uh, my goal of solving this issue is kind of like push me down this path of trying to figure things out. First thing I did is, since all the other speakers were blown out, I figured I would buy some good looking replacement speakers off of eBay. So these sit in the dash, like towards the base of the windshield, and swap them out, assuming that, you know, I'd see an improvement. And I really didn't. But one thing that I thought was interesting is that the speakers had this section here of something in the wiring. I also thought it was interesting that there were 3 wires going into this plug, but only 2 wires going into the speaker. But I swapped them out, didn't think much of it, didn't see an improvement. So then my next step was, okay, I'll just buy some replacement speakers. These are same size, 2.5-inch OD. They are 8 ohms. So one thing is that I learned, the resistance of the speaker kind of matters. Like most sound systems have 4 ohm speakers, I'm pretty sure. And if you were to put 4 ohm speakers in an 8 ohm system, it might overwork the amp and stuff like that. And I want to make sure it worked. One issue with these speakers is they are too deep for the enclosure, so I might have to 3D print something for that. So where this gets really interesting is when I swapped these out, it sounded a little bit better. And basically what I did was desoldered the factory speaker connector or loom from the original speaker, and temporarily, just as I test things out, crimped on these rather than soldering onto the terminals. And I did see a slight improvement in sound quality, but at high volume, vocals were still kind of like muddy. Midtones were a little bit, muddy is the best way I can describe it. So that pushed me down a rabbit hole of looking into, okay, how do you filter out kind of those low frequencies? It seemed like there were a lot of low frequencies going into this little speaker when it should be focusing on just outputting vocals and mids and things like that. So that led me to discover what crossovers are, and, you know, low pass crossovers, high pass crossovers, and dual band crossovers. And basically what we would want to do here is use a high pass crossover that filters out those low bass frequencies so that this can focus on vocals and up and not get muffled by any sort of bass. And basically what a high pass crossover is a capacitor that kind of filters that out. But, you know, I knew that this had something on here, so I figured, oh, this already has a crossover and it's probably a capacitor. Maybe the capacitor is just cooked, it's 20 years old. Maybe it's just not doing the job anymore. Actually, the first thing I did was I bypassed, deleted that crossover altogether and tested it out, and it sounded about the same. So I figured, okay, either the crossover is cooked or something else. But then I made a very interesting discovery. So this is the capacitor from this wiring harness. And one would think that the power wire would go through the capacitor and then go to the speaker side. But actually, the way this loom is set up, this harness, is the power wire goes directly, bypasses the capacitor, goes straight to the speaker. And this middle wire here, the yellow and red one, that wire comes up through the capacitor and then connects, like, a three-way connection, bridges into this end, and is connected to that power wire. But if you have a capacitor with, it's connected on one side and virtually not connected to anything on this side, because the connector in the car coming from the amp, it's a 3-pin connector, but it only has 2 wires going to it. It has a positive and a negative. So that kind of had me stumped. Why do they even have this 3rd pin if the car doesn't use it? There's nothing coming from the car into this 3rd pin. And why do they have this wire coming through the capacitor or the high pass crossover, and then connect into the positive terminal for the speaker? I don't know, who knows why they did that, but what I realized is, hey, I have a high pass crossover right here in the wiring harness, and in order to activate it or utilize it, all I have to do is swap that center pin for this pin, and then the positive, speaker signal coming from the car will go into that red and yellow wire, come through the crossover, and then into the speaker, thus filtering the low frequencies going to the speaker. So I was very, very skeptical, but I did try this. I tried this on the other one. So I had one hooked up as standard, where there's no filtering going to the speaker. Granted, I did this on the aftermarket speaker, so I'm not sure how this would sound on the factory speaker. But then I had the other side where the positive speaker signal was going through the capacitor, and I swear to you, the vocals sound clearer, more crisp. When the volume is turned all the way up, there's a lot less muddiness coming out of these dash speakers. So if you are experiencing the same thing, I'd be really curious, maybe give it a shot, maybe try to pull out your factory speakers, and maybe I'll still try this on this one. Literally just swap the black and green pin, and there's videos on how to do that on these connectors, but just swap the black and green pin for the red and yellow one, and then that will basically activate this dormant crossover. Now there might be sound systems, I feel like I've only come across 2 sound systems on the E53s, the Hi-Fi, the one with DSP and the one without. My car has DSP, so I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but maybe the non-DSP cars have, from the car, from the amp, have the positive speaker signal going to that middle pin. I don't know. if you see something different, put a comment, mention it in the comments. But anyway, it's interesting little hack that I found with these cars, and yeah, hopefully it helps someone out.